Hello, and thank you for listening to our presentation about concretizing plan specifications in the OBO Foundry. Plans, in the sense of specifications, play a critical role in medicine, science, and engineering. Treatment plans direct how patients are cared for. Experimental designs are necessary for ensuring an experiment's results are trustworthy and reproducible. And in engineering, developing detailed plan specifications such as blueprints allow other engineers to properly and safely construct devices that shape our lives, such as cell phones, automobiles, microwave ovens, and more. Within the OBO Foundry, the information artifact ontology has had a profound influence on how plan specifications, the intention to carry out a plan specification, and the process during which a plan specification is executed are represented. IAO extends the basic formal ontology. A plan specification is a type of information content entity that generically depends on one or more independent continuants. I'll say more about this on the next slides. A specifically dependent continuant, such as a quality or disposition, may concretize a plan specification. The concretization, which is an SDC, and the plan specification, which is a GDC, are related in virtue of depending on the same independent continuant for their existence. In IAO, the same plan specification can be concretized in multiple entities. For example, a study design, a type of plan specification, may be concretized in multiple entities, such as in a manuscript, computer, or in a person's memory. Furthermore, the nature of the concretizes relation is not one-to-one with generic dependence. Two distinct SDCs that depend on the same independent continuant can concretize a particular plan specification, and this plan specification can generically depend on multiple independent continuants. This leads us to what we call the RC, short for realizable concretization account. The concretizes relation permits a plan specification to be concretized as a realizable entity. This realizable entity is in a characteristic of the agent, and when the realizable concretization is realized in a process, which IAO calls a plan process, we have a nice ontology design pattern that connects the plan specification to an agent's plan in the sense of intention to carry out the plan specification, and connects the agent plan to the plan process in which the agent performs the plan specification's instructions. For example, the occurrence of a chemistry experiment involves realizing the chemist's plan, a realizable entity that concretizes the plan specification which contains the instructions for performing the experiment. To summarize, the RC account provides a nice design pattern that links the plan specification, agent, and plan process. The RC account has heavily influenced how plans and their execution are represented in the OBO Foundry, with over 40 OBO ontologies importing IAO's plan specification and plan process terms. Despite the nice way the RC account links together the plan specification, agent, and plan process, we find it lacking in two important ways. The first is that when we consider failed plans, which I'll discuss next, the RC account does not permit us to represent them without encountering difficulties inherent in the RC account framework. Second, the RC account struggles to represent change plans in a clear way. In the biomedical context, accounting for failure is extremely important. The determination of whether a treatment plan failed because of an unknown medical condition, faulty medical equipment, or provider negligence has important consequences. A previously unknown condition may require that the treatment plan be changed in drastic ways, and provider negligence or faulty equipment, such as defective dental restoration material, may result in legal action. When we consider failure within the framework of the RC account, either the failure was due to a fault in realizing the concretization, or the failure was due to an issue with the realizable concretization itself. For example, suppose a dentist successfully performs the actions necessary for restoring a tooth, but the material is defective. Was the realizable concretization realized? On the other hand, suppose the dentist is intoxicated and forgets to perform some critical steps. Does the dentist's intention to perform a tooth restoration concretize the plan specification for performing the restoration? Let's consider each question. In the case of faulty material, if we assert that the process did not realize the concretization, we lose the nice connection between the plan specification and the process during which the plan specification is carried out. The realizing of the concretization is the glue that binds the plan specification to the agent and the plan process. This connection is one of the motivations for the RC account, and without it, the RC account loses its appeal. If we assert that the plan process does realize the concretization, it is unclear in what sense the realizable entity is being realized. Realization is often described as a realizable entity being manifested or actualized in a process. For example, the solubility of material is realized or actualized when the soluble material is placed in water. It happens in full or doesn't happen at all. But what does it mean for a plan process to realize the concretization, but all the steps of the plan specification are not executed? Now let's consider the case in which a realizable concretization is somehow flawed. If we hold that the flawed concretization concretizes the plan specification, then how extreme can the intention to carry out a plan specification deviate from the content of the plan specification? If the agent rejects a plan specification, for example, the agent thinks the plan specification is immoral, does the agent's intention to not execute the plan specification count as a concretization? On the other hand, if we hold that the plan specification is not concretized, then what is the relationship between the plan specification and the actions that the agent performs? It makes sense to me, at least, to say that a drunk dentist executes a plan specification even though the dentist's intention is flawed. Under the RC account, this doesn't make sense. The second issue with the RC account is that plans change. Plans are not always static. A dentist may initially plan to place a filling in a tooth, but after further examination, plans to perform a root canal. How does the RC account framework represent such changes? Presumably, there is some concretization of the specification for how to place a filling already present in the dentist's memory. The dentist then decides to place a filling. But is there a relation between the pre-existing concretization in the dentist's memory and the tooth restoration plan? Later, when the dentist decides not to place a filling, the intention to do this, that is, the realizable concretization, ceases to exist. When the dentist decides to instead perform the root canal, presumably the information about how to do this is already present in the dentist's memory. But again, it is unclear what the relationship is between the plan specification about how to perform the root canal and the dentist's newly formed intention to perform one. To recap, the issue that the RC account has representing when plans change is not that new plans come into existence, but that it is unclear what the nature of the relationship is between the new plans and the previously existing concretizations of plan specifications. The issues that failed or incomplete plans raised for the RC account has not gone unnoticed by other ontologists. Let's consider some other possible solutions. First is the core ontology for biology and biomedicine. Cobb redefines plan process by adding the caveat that a plan process is the result of an agent's intention to carry out a plan rather than realizing a concretization of a plan specification. Since the realization does not necessarily happen, it is only intended, plan process can be further specialized into completely executed and failed plan process. However, there are some critical problems with Cobb's account. First, a plan in Cobb is both a GDC and SDC, but this is quite odd. GDCs and SDCs depend on independent continuance in very different ways. An SDC depends on the same set of one or more independent continuance during the duration of its existence. A GDC, on the other hand, may depend on different independent continuance at different times. In this sense, a GDC can migrate from one independent continuant to another independent continuant over the course of its existence. This entails that SDCs and GDCs are distinct types of entities. Second, Cobb's solution doesn't consider cases in which the plan, that is, the concretization of the plan specification, is flawed. In such cases, we encounter the previously discussed problems of the RC account. Another possible solution is the account provided by Barton and his co-authors. In this account, a Directive Information Content Entity, or DICE, is said to S-direct an action if the DICE successfully directs the agent to perform the action, or actions, and the DICE A-directs the action if the agent attempts to perform the action but does not succeed. Similar to Cobb, Barton's account struggles to account for cases when the agent doesn't recall all of the DICE's instruction. If the agent successfully performs all the actions of the misremembered DICE, did the agent S-direct or A-direct the agent's actions? From the agent's perspective, all the actions were successful, but relative to the complete DICE, the agent did not succeed. I think it makes the most sense to represent this as the DICE A-directing the agent's actions, but the answer to the question about how to represent this is not completely clear. Also, we should consider cases, again, when the agent refused to carry out a DICE. If the agent performs an action that contravenes an action directed by the DICE, does the DICE S-direct or A-direct the contravening action? Neither makes sense. And after all, we perform lots of actions that are not directed by a DICE. However, in the case of refusal, the directed action is somehow related to the contravening action, but it is unclear what this relation should be in Barton's account. One last possibility to consider are the changes made to the Basic Formal Ontologies 2020 release. In BFO 2020, a plan specification can be concretized in a process. This permits the plan specification and the process during which the plan specification is executed to be directly related. However, we are left with the question of whether processes that fail to execute the plan specification also concretize the plan specification. Cobb, Barton, and BFO 2020 cannot fully account for failed plans, but let's now discuss some solutions we think can. Our first solution is the use of the Common Core Ontologies prescribed by relation. The advantage of using prescribed by is that it separates the normative aspect of a plan specification from the performance of the plan. Plan specifications represent what should happen, not what did happen. In the RC account, the realizable concretization tightly binds the execution of the plan specification to the instructions or information about how to perform the actions. By decoupling the execution of the plan specification from whether the execution was a success or a failure, we avoid the issues raised by the RC account. The determination of whether a plan specification was successfully carried out is a separate issue. A downside of using prescribed by is that it doesn't nicely connect the agent to the process during which the agent executes the plan specification. Participating in a process, it does not convey the sense of execution that realization does. We can address this somewhat by using a role to more tightly relate the process to the agent, but this is still unsatisfactory for those who need or want to represent the intent of the agent. Our second solution is to create ontology terms for representing the creation of the agent's plan. Similar to COB, we represent the agent's plan as a realizable entity, but rather than representing the plan as a concretization, the agent's plan is the result of a plan creation process that uses or inputs the concretization of the plan specification and forms or outputs the agent's plan. We note that although COB has a plan term, we cannot reuse it for two reasons. The first is that in COB, the term plan, which references the ontology for biomedical investigations term of the same name, is a sibling of disposition and role. This doesn't make sense. In BFO, dispositions and roles are distinguished by whether their bearer must be physically changed if they cease to exist. The destruction of a disposition requires its bearer to physically change. The destruction of a role does not. This bifurcates the way in which a realizable entity can be distinguished, and it is unclear how a plan cannot be a child of either disposition or role. So we define plan as a type of disposition. Second, we use a results and formation of relation, which is similar to the relation ontology's results and formation of anatomical entity relation. However, we cannot reuse RO's relation since the plan creation process forms a disposition and not an anatomical entity. We acknowledge that the pattern for using plan creation process is more complex than using prescribed by. However, we think that the use of prescribed by will satisfy most situations. Also, if needed, a property chain can be used to define a shortcut relation between an agent and a plan specification. Finally, let's wrap things up. We summarize the RC account. That is the representation of a plan process as the realization of the concretization of a plan specification. We found that the RC account was not adequate for representing failed plans and left unanswered the question of how a plan specification concretized in an agent's memory was related to the agent's plan or intention to execute the plan specification. To address these shortcomings, we propose the use of the prescribed by relation and the addition of plan creation process and plan terms. These approaches decouple the normative aspect of a plan specification from the performing of the plan specification. If a plan fails, either through external conditions that thwart the process or because of cognitive errors made by the agent, the connection between the plan specification, agent, and process remains intact and unproblematic. Based on the information in a plan specification, the agent forms a plan or intention to execute the plan specification. If the execution fails, the plan is still realized in a process. The evaluation of a plan's success is a separate matter. We hope that this work convinces you to reconsider using the RC account in your OBO-based ontologies. However, we recognize that there is still more work for us to do. First, we need to develop an account for evaluating the success or failure of a plan. For relatively simple plans, such as food recipes, this should be straightforward. But many plans, such as long-term treatment plans or plans for building skyscrapers, are quite complex, and we need to be able to account for how such complex plans are evaluated. Second, we need to make our work consumable by the wider ontology community. One option is to add the terms plan creation process and plan as a kind of disposition to COB. I am skeptical that this will succeed. The COB community, to be frank, is quite argumentative, and I am not blameless for some of these arguments. In fact, you can find many of the points presented here in the COP issue tracker on GitHub. A more promising option might be able to add the prescribed by relation to the relation ontology. This would make the prescribed by relation more widely available within the OBO Foundry. Finally, if all else fails, there is the option of setting up a standalone ontology resource using W3ID pearls. In closing, I thank you for listening to my presentation, and please don't hesitate to contact myself or the co-authors if you have questions, concerns, potential improvements, or wish to collaborate with us.